In the 13th century, a storm of hoofbeats and arrows swept across the known world. From the shores of the Pacific to the forests of Poland, one name struck terror into the hearts of kings and emperors alike: the Mongols. They weren't just an army, they were a force of nature, a hurricane of conquest that leveled ancient cities, toppled empires, and redrew the map of the world in blood and fire. Persia, China, Russia, the Abbasid Caliphate, all had fallen. Their military machine was the most efficient, brutal, and successful in human history. And in the final years of that century, this unstoppable force arrived at the gates of India. The scattered kingdoms of the subcontinent, rich beyond imagining and historically divided, seemed like the perfect next victim. The Mongol horde, led by the prince Qutlugh Khwaja, rode with the absolute conviction of their destiny to rule the world. They fully expected to add the glittering prize of Delhi to their vast collection of conquered capitals. They anticipated another swift, brutal conquest, but they were wrong. To understand the magnitude of what the Delhi Sultanate achieved, you first have to understand the sheer terror the Mongols represented. They weren't just another invading army. They were a phenomenon. Under the unifying genius of Genghis Khan, the fractious nomadic tribes of the steppes had been forged into a single, disciplined war machine with one terrifying purpose: world conquest. Their doctrine was simple: submit or die, and millions died. Cities that resisted weren't just captured, they were erased. In the Khwarezmian Empire, which bordered India, great centers of learning like Samarkand and Bukhara were reduced to smoking ruins, their populations systematically exterminated. The Mongols didn't just defeat armies, they broke the will of entire civilizations. Their tactics were a whirlwind of speed, deception, and overwhelming firepower. Their horse archers were masters of the feigned retreat, luring confident enemies into devastating ambushes. Their siegecraft, learned from captured Chinese engineers, could bring down the most formidable walls, and their command structure, based on merit and discipline, allowed them to coordinate massive armies across vast distances with terrifying precision. By the late 13th century, the original Mongol Empire had fractured into several successor states, or khanates. The one that cast its shadow over India was the Chagatai Khanate, which ruled Central Asia. Its ruler, Dua Khan, inherited all the ambition of his ancestors. He looked south, towards the fertile plains and fabulous wealth of India, and saw it as his birthright. India, by contrast, was a patchwork of rival states. The power that stood in the Mongol path was the Delhi Sultanate, a Turco-Afghan kingdom that was itself only a century old. It was powerful, but it was an island, beset by internal rebellions and rival kingdoms. The sultans of Delhi knew the Mongol threat was real. For decades, Mongol raids had nibbled at their northwestern frontier. The first major incursion came in 1221, when Genghis Khan himself chased a rival prince to the banks of the Indus River. He sacked cities in the Punjab before turning his attention elsewhere, but the warning was clear. In 1241, a Mongol force sacked Lahore, butchering its population. By the time Alauddin Khalji seized the throne of Delhi in 1296, the situation was critical. Alauddin was not a man born to rule. He was a ruthless, ambitious, and brilliant usurper who had murdered his own uncle to take power. He was a man of cold, calculating pragmatism. He knew his grip on power was precarious, threatened by resentful nobles from within and the growing Mongol storm from without. He was a predator who had just seized his territory, and now a far larger predator was at his borders. Almost immediately, the raids intensified. In 1297, a large Mongol army ravaged the Punjab. Alauddin dispatched his brother Ulugh Khan and his greatest general, Zafar Khan, to meet them. At the Battle of Jaran Manjur, the Sultanate's army crushed the invaders. The captured survivors were brought to Delhi and executed as a warning, but the Mongols weren't so easily deterred. The very next year, another army invaded and seized the fort of Sivastan. Once again, Alauddin sent the ferocious Zafar Khan, who recaptured the fort and dragged the Mongol leaders back to Delhi in chains. Zafar Khan was becoming a legend, a hero whose name was synonymous with victory. It's said that when their horses shied from water, Mongol commanders would ask, "Have you seen Zafar Khan?" These victories, however, only angered Dua Khan in Central Asia. He had underestimated the new sultan. These defeats were an insult to Mongol prestige. The next invasion wouldn't be a raid. It would be a full-blown conquest. In late 1299, Dua Khan dispatched his own son, Qutlugh Khwaja, with a formidable army. While some chroniclers claimed an exaggerated 200,000 men, modern estimates place it at around 50,000 to 60,000 battle-hardened horsemen. This time, their objective wasn't plunder. Their orders were to bypass the frontier forts and march directly for the heart of the Sultanate, Delhi itself. As news of the approaching horde spread, panic gripped the capital. People from the countryside flooded into the city, and prices for basic goods skyrocketed. Alauddin's chief advisor begged him to sue for peace, to negotiate rather than risk everything in an open battle. The problem was clear. The most dangerous army in the world was at their doorstep, and they were coming to erase them from existence. Alauddin Khalji listened to his advisor's counsel to negotiate. He understood the logic of fear, but he rejected it. He declared that if he were to hide from an invader, he would be unworthy of ruling. He announced his intention to march out and face the Mongols head-on. But this wasn't a boast born of blind courage. It was a calculated decision based on a secret weapon he had been building since taking the throne, a weapon that wasn't a single piece of technology, but an entire system of statecraft. This secret weapon had three core components: a revolutionary economic system, a radical military overhaul, and a brutal frontier policy. First, the money. War is expensive, and fighting the Mongols required a massive, permanent, and professional standing army. Previous sultans had relied on a system of granting land to nobles who would supply troops. This was unreliable. Alauddin needed an army loyal only to him, paid in cash from the state treasury. To fund this, he enacted ruthless economic reforms. He revolutionized the tax system, ordering a complete survey of the land and raising the land tax to a staggering 50% of all agricultural produce in the fertile regions. He eliminated the middlemen, ensuring the full amount flowed straight to the treasury. But a large army paid in cash would just drive up prices. So Alauddin took the extraordinary step of implementing comprehensive price controls in Delhi and other key military garrisons. He fixed the price of everything from grain and cloth to horses and slaves. To enforce this, he established state-controlled markets. Hoarding was forbidden, and massive state granaries were built to release surplus during droughts. Spies were everywhere, and the punishments for cheating were horrifyingly creative. A shopkeeper caught short-weighting a customer would have an equivalent amount of flesh carved from his own body. This economic weapon gave Alauddin a stable economy that could support a huge military on salaries that would have otherwise been impossibly low. With the financing secured, Alauddin focused on the army itself. He is considered the first Sultan of Delhi to establish a large, permanent standing army paid in cash. But numbers meant nothing without quality. To combat the rampant corruption where commanders inflated muster rolls with ghost soldiers, Alauddin introduced two brilliant reforms, likely adapted from practices in other Turkic and Persian states: Dag and Chara. Dag was the practice of branding every cavalry horse with an imperial mark. This ensured a high-quality war horse couldn't be swapped for an inferior one. Chera was the creation of a detailed descriptive roll for every single soldier, a medieval identity card that made it impossible to pass off civilians as trained troops. This system created an army that was professional, accountable, and loyal to the state, not a local lord. The cavalry was the core, but it was a combined arms force, including elite lancers and mounted archers. And the Sultanate had one more element the Mongols did not: war elephants. When integrated properly, they were terrifying shock weapons, living, armored fortresses that could smash cavalry lines. Finally, there was the frontier. Alauddin implemented a blood and iron policy, repairing the chain of forts along the northwestern border. These weren't just for defense. They were forward bases for proactive patrols. His general Ghazi Malik became so effective that he began launching his own raids into Mongol-held territory in Afghanistan, disrupting their staging grounds. This, then, was Alauddin's true secret weapon. Not just elephants or a single tactic, but a fully integrated system of economic control, military professionalization, and strategic defense. It was a state re-engineered for total war. And as Qutlugh Khwaja's horde descended upon Delhi in 1299, this incredible machine was about to be put to the test. The year is 1299. Qutlugh Khwaja's army has arrived at Kili, a plain just miles from Delhi. The city is in a state of panic, but outside its walls, Alauddin Khalji is a picture of grim resolve. He has gathered his army and arranged it in a traditional formation: a left wing, a right wing, a center, and a vanguard. But all eyes were on the right wing, commanded by the most celebrated Mongol killer in the Sultanate, the fearsome Zafar Khan. Alauddin himself took overall command. Alauddin's strategy was patience. He understood the Mongols thrived on chaos, on luring enemies out of formation. He ordered his commanders not to attack without his express command. But Zafar Khan, a man whose entire reputation was built on aggression, saw the enemy before him and his blood boiled. Disobeying the Sultan's direct order, he led the right wing in a thunderous charge. The ground shook as thousands of Sultanate cavalry smashed into the Mongol line. Initially, the charge was devastatingly effective. The weight and fury of Zafar Khan's attack buckled the Mongol left flank. The elephants, like living battering rams, created panic among the Mongol horses. The Mongol line broke, and they fell back. Zafar Khan, sensing a complete victory, roared for his men to pursue. This was the classic Mongol trap, and Zafar Khan had just walked straight into it. The retreating Mongol wing wasn't a rout. It was a feigned retreat. Having lured Zafar Khan's division miles away from the main army, they suddenly turned. A hidden Mongol reserve force emerged, slamming into Zafar Khan's flank and rear. In an instant, the hunter became the hunted. The Sultanate's right wing was completely cut off and surrounded. From the main battle line, Alauddin watched this unfold. His generals urged him to send reinforcements, but Alauddin made a cold, brutal calculation. He had grown wary and jealous of Zafar Khan's popularity. Strategically, sending more troops into the ambush would be folly. He refused the order to advance. Zafar Khan and his men were on their own. Even surrounded, Zafar Khan fought like a cornered tiger. Chroniclers say that Qutlugh Khwaja, impressed by his bravery, offered him a chance to surrender. Zafar Khan refused, choosing to die fighting for the Sultan who had abandoned him. He and his men fought to the last, inflicting thousands of casualties before they were finally overwhelmed. With the Sultanate's right wing annihilated, the Mongols must have believed the battle was won. They regrouped and threw their main force at Alauddin's center. This was the decisive moment. They were not met by a panicked, wavering line. They were met by a wall of disciplined steel. The soldiers of the standing army, paid in cash and loyal to the Sultan, held their ground. And into this swirling chaos, Alauddin unleashed his trump card, the main body of his war elephants. They were armored, with archers on their backs, acting as mobile fortresses that smashed into the Mongol ranks. The battle raged for hours. The Mongols, masters of the swift victory, were being dragged into a war of attrition they weren't equipped for. Their classic tactics had failed. They had suffered immense casualties, first from Zafar Khan's suicidal charge, and now against Alauddin's unyielding center. As evening fell, a stalemate settled over the bloody field. The Mongol leader, Qutlugh Khwaja, was gravely wounded. Their aura of invincibility was shattered. After a tense standoff, the Mongols made their decision. Under the cover of darkness, they began the long, humiliating retreat back to Central Asia. Qutlugh Khwaja would not survive the journey. Delhi was saved. The war wasn't over. After another Mongol army besieged an unprepared Delhi in 1303, Alauddin strengthened his defenses even further. The victories kept coming. In 1305, at the Battle of Amroha, another Mongol force was intercepted and annihilated. Then came the final, decisive confrontation in 1306. A massive Mongol army under a general named Kopek crossed the Indus. Alauddin dispatched his rising star, the general Malik Kafur, supported by the frontier commander Ghazi Malik Tughluq. Kafur met the Mongols on the banks of the Ravi River and inflicted their most devastating defeat yet. It was a complete rout. Alauddin's retribution was horrific, a piece of psychological warfare. Thousands of prisoners were beheaded, and their skulls were reportedly used to build towers on the outskirts of Delhi, a ghastly monument to his victory. Chroniclers claimed that of the 50,000 to 60,000 invaders, only a small fraction survived, but these figures may be exaggerated. After this, the great Mongol invasions of India stopped. The death of Dua Khan in 1307 and internal struggles played a part, but the primary reason was the sheer cost of fighting Alauddin's war machine. While some minor raids would continue, the grand project of conquering India was abandoned. India was no longer an easy target. It was a fortress. The defeat of the Mongols was arguably Alauddin Khilji's greatest achievement. While older, wealthier empires had been swept away, the fledgling Delhi Sultanate had stood firm. This victory secured the Indian subcontinent from the fate that had befallen Persia, Central Asia, and Russia. Indian civilization would continue on its own trajectory. Internally, these victories cemented Alauddin's power. The usurper was now hailed as the savior of Hindustan. His authority became absolute, and the very reforms he had instituted to fight the Mongols, the efficient tax system, the spy network, the powerful standing army, became the permanent architecture of his administration, creating one of the most autocratic states in Indian history. The army, forged in the crucible of the Mongol Wars, now became a tool for imperial expansion. With the northern frontier finally secure, Alauddin and his brilliant general Malik Kafur turned their attention south. In a series of breathtaking campaigns, they marched into the Deccan and beyond, conquering the Yadava, Kakatiya, and Hoysala kingdoms. They brought back unimaginable wealth. Legend says this is when the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond was acquired, though contemporary sources do not confirm this. The secret weapon designed for defense had been repurposed for conquest. For the Mongols of the Chagatai Khanate, the Indian campaigns were a disaster. The repeated, costly defeats drained their manpower and shattered their psychological edge. The legend of their invincibility had been proven false. The initiative had passed to Delhi. The legacy of this conflict is complex. Alauddin Khalji is remembered as a tyrant, a ruthless despot whose policies squeezed his subjects and whose punishments were barbaric. Yet, he is also the man who saved India from the Mongols. His methods were brutal, but they were brutally effective. The system he built was the perfect counter to the Mongol threat. It wasn't just the war elephants. It was the tax collector measuring a farmer's field hundreds of miles away. It was the clerk in Delhi recording a soldier's features. It was the spy in the marketplace. It was the brand seared onto the flank of a warhorse. This was the secret weapon, the recognition that to defeat the most organized military on earth, you couldn't just have a better army. You had to have a better run, more ruthless, and more efficient state. So how did Delhi destroy the Mongols? They did it by refusing to play the Mongols' game. Where the Mongols relied on speed, Alauddin built a system based on fortifications and static power. Where the Mongols sought to break formations, Delhi's army held its ground with discipline. And where the Mongols funded their empire through plunder, Alauddin funded his through a revolutionary, if brutal, system of centralized taxation and economic control. Delhi's victory wasn't an accident. It was a victory of strategy, logistics, and state building. It proved that the Mongol war machine, for all its ferocity, was not invincible. It could be stopped, it could be broken, and it could be defeated by a leader and a system as ruthless and determined as itself. It leaves us with a final, thought-provoking question. What might have become of the Indian subcontinent if Delhi had fallen, if the secret weapon had failed? It is one of history's great what-ifs, a testament to how close the world's most fearsome empire came to conquering the jewel of India, and how a brilliant, tyrannical sultan forged the weapons that ensured they would fail.